The drone vanished on a Tuesday. Not in a dramatic way. No explosion. No warning signal. It simply flew into the dark mouth of the old ruin, sent back 4 seconds of grainy footage, and then its light went out. Dara watched the feed cut to black on her wrist screen and stood there for a moment in the wind. The sky above Dravsal was the color of old iron, heavy with clouds that never quite became rain. The volcanic plains stretched in every direction, cracked and pale, and the ruin sat at the center of them like a tooth left behind after everything else was gone. Soren crossed his arms beside her. We log it as a signal loss and move on. It was a heat signature, Dara said. Not geological, biological. This place has been empty for 60 years. The drone disagrees. Soren looked at the ruin. It was not large. The Drithari who had built it had built low to the ground, long tunnels pressed into the rock like something trying to stay hidden from the sky. The entrance was a dark rectangle, maybe 1.5 meters tall. The edges were carved with old symbols that no active consortium translator bothered with anymore. "You are going in," Soren said. It was not a question. "Someone has to get the drone back." He handed her a lamp without another word. That was the thing about Soren. He complained first and helped second, but he always helped. Dara ducked through the entrance. The cold hit her immediately. Not the cold of empty space or a broken heating unit. This was the cold of something old, like the ruin had been holding its breath for decades, and the air inside had simply stopped moving. Her lamp threw a pale circle on the floor. The stone was smooth, worn down by something that used to pace it regularly. Along the walls were shallow grooves at different heights, the kind left by claws over years of use. She moved slowly. The tunnel opened after a few meters into a wider chamber, low-ceilinged, with a floor of fine pale dust. The drone was there, resting on its side near the far wall, one rotor bent. Dara crouched to pick it up. Something breathed. She went still. The sound was faint, barely a sound at all, more like the suggestion of one. She turned her lamp toward the far corner and kept it low, not pointing directly, the way her field training had taught her for nocturnal animals. Sudden light caused panic. Panic caused injury. Hers or the animals. In the corner, pressed flat against the stone, was the hatchling. It was small, much smaller than she had expected a Drithari to be at any age. Its scales were pale, almost white, the color of bone left in the sun. Its wings were folded tight against its body, and its legs were tucked under it like it had been trying to take up as little space as possible for a very long time. Its head was resting on the floor, pointed toward her. Its eyes were open, pale, milky. They did not reflect her lamp. Dara did not move. She breathed slowly, deliberately, and watched the hatchling's nostrils flare as it processed her smell. Its head lifted a centimeter off the floor, then another. It was listening to her breathe. It was blind, completely blind, and it had been here alone in the dark and the cold, with nothing to listen to for what looked like weeks. Her comm crackled. Soren's voice came through low. "What is taking so long?" The hatchling flinched at the sound. Its wings pressed tighter. Dara clicked the comm twice, their signal for wait, and silenced it. She set the drone down gently and sat on the floor, not crouching, not standing, sitting, small, still. She let the silence settle back into the room and waited for the hatchling to understand that the strange sound was gone. It took 3 minutes. Slowly the wings relaxed. The head lowered back toward the floor but did not rest all the way. It was still listening. It was always listening. She understood that now. Listening was what it had instead of sight. Every sound was data. Every silence was a question. Dara let out a slow breath, just slightly louder than normal, controlled, a sound with a shape to it. The hatchling's head turned directly toward her, not toward the lamp, not toward the drone, toward the sound of her. She did it again, same rhythm, same length. The hatchling lifted its head fully. Its nostrils worked. Its pale eyes moved in her direction with a focus that had nothing to do with seeing and everything to do with knowing. It made a small sound, then low, questioning, barely more than a vibration in its chest. Dara felt something tighten behind her ribs, not pity, something older than pity. She placed her hand on the floor, palm down, fingers relaxed. She did not reach toward the hatchling. She simply put her hand down and left it there. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the hatchling moved. Slowly, on shaking legs, it crossed the space between them, one careful step at a time. It stopped just short of her hand. Its head lowered. Its nose pressed against her palm, and it exhaled long, low, the sound of something that had been holding a question for weeks and had finally found a place to put it down. Dara did not move. Outside, the wind crossed the plains and made no sound against the stone. Inside, for the first time in 60 years, the ruin was not empty. The consortium's response came in 12 minutes. Dara was still sitting on the floor of the ruin when the message hit her wrist screen, flagged urgent in red. She read it once, then set the screen face down on the stone and did not move. Soren read it over the comm. Non-viable remnant, failed clutch, do not interfere, those are their words. I know what the words say. Dara, I am not leaving. There was a long pause. Then, I am going to pretend you said something I could agree with. Check in every 30 minutes or I am coming in. She clicked the comm twice and looked at the hatchling. Rin, she had started calling it that in her head because it needed a name, and the ruin felt like the kind of place that deserved one, had not moved far. It had settled a half-meter from her, wings folded, head resting on the stone again but angled toward her. Every time she shifted weight, it lifted its head. Every time she was still, it relaxed. It was tracking her by the small sounds of her body, the creak of her jacket, the rhythm of her breath, the occasional tap of her fingers against the floor. It was studying her. She found that more remarkable than frightening. The med bay on the Callow Reach carried food paste for post-surgical nutrition, dense, protein-heavy, slightly sweet. She had brought 2 pouches without quite admitting to herself why. Now she opened the first one slowly, keeping the sound minimal. The hatchling's nostrils worked immediately. Its head came up. Its body tensed, not in fear but in focus. She squeezed a small amount onto her palm and held it out. Not toward the hatchling, just out, available. Rin did not approach immediately. It smelled the air for a full minute. Then it stood on its shaking legs and crossed the floor again with that careful, measured movement, the walk of something that had learned that floors were not always where they appeared to be. It stopped at her hand, smelled the paste, and ate. Not frantically, deliberately, like it was thinking about each swallow. When the paste was gone, it stood at her hand for a moment, then walked back to its corner and lay down. It did not ask for more. It had eaten what it needed. Dara stared at the empty corner of her palm and thought that she had never seen a starving animal eat with that much dignity. She did not hear Voss until he spoke. That animal has not eaten in 11 days. She turned fast. In the entrance of the ruin, just inside the dark rectangle of the doorway, stood a Drithari elder. He was enormous, the scaled equivalent of old, his hide dark and ridged, his eyes a deep amber that caught the lamplight. He stood with the still patience of something that had stopped being impressed by the world a long time ago. Dara had read about the Drithari in briefings. She had not been prepared for how much space they took up even when they were not moving. You have been watching, she said. I have been watching this ruin for 60 years, Voss said. His consortium standard was slow and deliberate, each word shaped carefully, the way someone speaks a language they learned for necessity rather than love. I watched the clutch hatch. I watched them fail. I watched the council leave. I stayed. Why? He looked at her the way mountains look at questions. Because someone should. Dara turned back to Rin, who had lifted its head at the sound of Voss. Its body was very still, not relaxed still. The difference was important. It knew he was there. It did not approach. It does not know you, Dara said. No, it knows only the dark and the stone. Voss stepped fully inside, his head bent under the ceiling. And now you. The consortium says it cannot survive without a bonded elder. The consortium says many things. Can it? Voss was quiet for a moment. No, he said. Not on this world, not through the storm season. A hatchling without guidance cannot hunt, cannot navigate, cannot read the pressure changes that come before a collapse. It will make a mistake in the dark, and that will be the end of it. Dara looked at Rin. Rin's head was turned toward her again. Then teach me, she said. Voss looked at her for a long time, long enough that the lamplight flickered once from a draft through the entrance, long enough that Rin lay its head back down on the stone. You are not Drithari, he said finally. No, I'm the thing that stayed. Whatever Voss made of that, he kept behind his amber eyes. He turned and walked back toward the entrance, his tail sweeping a slow arc through the dust. At the threshold he paused, and without turning, he said something in Old Drithari, a low, rolling phrase that the translator on her wrist rendered only partially before giving up. The part it caught said, the one who listens when all else is dark. Then he stepped outside and left the entrance open behind him. The cold plains air came in, and Rin pressed a little closer to Dara's side, seeking the warmth of her presence the way a compass needle seeks north. She reached down and placed one hand, very lightly, against its flank. Its heart was beating fast, but it was beating. That, Dara decided, was something to work with. On the fourth day, Rin followed her out of the ruin for the first time. Not far, 3 steps past the entrance, and then it stopped, wings half spread, head working in slow arcs as it processed the open sky. Wind, space, the echo of the plains instead of the tight, familiar echo of stone walls. It stood there for a full minute, and Dara stood with it, not pulling, not guiding, just present. Then Rin folded its wings and sat down exactly where it was, on the threshold, half in and half out, deciding on its own terms. Dara had begun to understand that this was how it did everything. She had also begun to talk. Not to fill silence, there was plenty of silence, and Rin seemed to like it, but because her voice had become a kind of fixed point for the hatchling, a reference, something to locate itself by. So she talked while she worked, low and even, narrating nothing important. The weather outside, the texture of the stone, a memory of her grandmother's kitchen, which smelled like cardamom and always had the radio on. Rin would growl softly when her voice tensed. It would hum a low chest sound, barely audible when she laughed. It was not understanding words, it was reading her. On the 5th day, Voss came back. He sat at the entrance and watched her feed Rin the morning paste. He said nothing for a long time, and Dara had learned that silence from Voss was not absence. It was assessment. The hatchling is gaining weight, he said finally. It eats well. Drithari young must learn to navigate by pressure change before their 2nd month. The low-frequency vibrations that come before a ground collapse, a flood, a storm shift. They feel it in their bones before any instrument detects it. He paused. You cannot teach that. No human can feel what we feel. Can you teach it to recognize when I react to those things? Voss tilted his head. This was, Dara had noticed, what he did instead of blinking when something surprised him. Explain, he said. Rin already tracks me by sound. It knows my breathing pattern when I am calm and when I am not. If I learn to recognize the signs, you can detect low cloud formations, changes in the stone's surface temperature, soil moisture shifts before a quake, and I react to those signs out loud. Rin learns to respond to my response. It uses me as an instrument. Another long pause. You are describing a relay. Yes. That is not how it is done. I know, but it might work. Voss was quiet for long enough that a gust of wind crossed the plains and moved through the entrance and disturbed the dust on the floor. Rin tracked the air movement with its nose and then turned back toward Dara's voice. "I will tell you what to watch for," Voss said at last. "What I cannot give you I will describe." That was how the lessons began. Each morning Voss arrived and spoke, and Dara wrote in the small field notebook she carried in her jacket pocket. He described pressure patterns in the Dravsal atmosphere that preceded storms by 6 hours. He explained how the cracks in the volcanic plain sounded different, a faint tick, almost like cooling metal in the 40 minutes before a fissure opened. He told her which direction the wind had to come from for the ruin's interior echo to change, and what that change meant about the temperature dropping outside. None of it was things she could feel. All of it was things she could learn to observe. In the evening, Soren visited. He sat outside the entrance, unwilling to go in but unwilling to stay away. "The consortium is flagging your daily reports as non-compliant," he told her on the 6th evening. "I am reporting exactly what I observe. You are reporting that you are feeding, sheltering, and I am quoting here, forming a communicative bond with a protected apex species. All of that is accurate." Soren rubbed his face. He had the particular look of a man who had decided something was someone else's problem and kept having it handed back to him. "Mav is coming. Personally, he is bringing a team." Dara looked through the entrance. Rin was curled near the wall, asleep, its pale scales rising and falling slowly. It had moved its sleeping spot each day, but always ending up within 2 meters of wherever Dara sat, not clinging, just orienting. "Let him come," she said. "Dara, he has authority to terminate the contact." "He has authority to try." Soren stood there for a moment. Then he said in a very different voice, "Is it doing okay, the little one?" Dara smiled. "It followed me outside today 3 steps." He was quiet. Then, 3 steps is a lot for something that has only ever known the dark. She nodded. It was. It was an enormous amount for something that had been surviving in silence since before it had any reason to believe the world outside was worth the risk. The next morning she arrived at the ruin and Rin was already at the entrance, waiting. Not sitting on the threshold this time. Standing just outside it in the open air, head raised, wings folded, listening to the planes. She stopped 3 meters away and waited. Rin turned toward the sound of her footsteps and made the low, questioning sound, the one she had heard on the very first night. She answered it the same way she always did, with her breath, slow, steady, present. Rin walked toward her and pressed its head against her leg. 3 steps yesterday. Open air today. She wondered what it would be tomorrow and thought that this was what it meant to be trusted by something that had every reason not to trust anything at all. Counselor Mav arrived on a ship that was too clean for Dravsal. It gleamed against the gray plain, white and angular, and it landed 200 meters from the ruin with the kind of precision that said the pilot had been specifically told to keep distance from the protected site. 4 enforcement officers came down the ramp first, wearing the pale blue of Consortium Field Authority. Mav came after them. Smaller than Dara expected, the Vreth were slender, long-necked, with iridescent scales that shifted color at the edges when they moved. His were a controlled, diplomatic silver. He walked the 200 meters without hurrying and stopped in front of Dara. His secondary eyelids closed once, the Vreth equivalent of a long blink. "Field Researcher Dara," he said, "this situation has been mishandled." "Good to meet you too, Counselor." The animal inside that structure is a registered protected species under Consortium Ecological Preservation Act 14, subsection 9. Your contact with it constitutes unauthorized interference. I am here to end the contact and assess whether your actions have caused behavioral contamination. Dara stood in the entrance. The animal was starving. The animal is non-viable. Its condition is a natural outcome of its hatching circumstances. Interference does not change the long-term prognosis. It has been eating for 8 days. It has gained weight. It navigates the open plain within a 20-meter radius of the ruin. That is not natural outcome. That is progress. Mav's scale edges shifted toward pale gold, not quite irritation, not quite curiosity. That is contamination. You have altered its behavioral patterns. I gave it a reason to stay alive. I am not sure how that is the harmful thing in this conversation. One of the enforcement officers moved toward the entrance. Rin heard the boots on the stone before anyone else reacted. The footsteps of someone unfamiliar, at the wrong rhythm, too fast. The hatchling came to the entrance. It did not growl. It did not rear up. It simply appeared in the opening, pale and still, and stopped there. The officer stopped. Mav looked at the hatchling. His secondary eyelids worked again, slower this time. "Step back from the entrance," he said to his officer. Then to Dara, "The animal came to you. It came to the sound. It knows the difference between footsteps it recognizes and ones it does not. That is not a behavior logged in any Drithari hatchling observation on record. With respect, Counselor, most Drithari hatchlings were not raised in complete isolation for 8 weeks before anyone found them." Mav was quiet. He looked at Rin. Rin had turned slightly toward Dara's voice and was standing in the posture she now recognized as calm attention, weight back, wings loose, head tilted, not afraid, listening. It was Soren who broke the silence, coming around from the side of the ruin with his field scanner out and his face doing the thing where he was trying very hard to appear calm. "We have a problem," he said. "We have several," Mav said. "A bigger one." Soren turned the scanner toward Dara so she could see the display. "Storm season moved forward. There is a pressure front coming in from the eastern shelf. The meteorological model is showing it will hit within 40 hours, maybe less." Dara looked at the ruin entrance. The structure was low to the ground, sealed on 3 sides, but the plain around it would flood. She had read enough of Voss's geology notes to know that the ruin's floor sat below the surrounding terrain by almost half a meter. In a major storm, the water would come in. "Rin cannot survive a flood," she said. "The animal will have to manage," Mav said. "Drithari young in the historical record have. The historical record does not have a blind hatchling alone in a below-grade structure during a category storm on Dravsal." She turned to face him fully. "We need to move it to the ship." "That is absolutely not." "Counselor," Voss's voice came from behind them all. No one had seen him arrive. That was the thing about Voss. He moved when he wanted to move and arrived where he chose to arrive, and the in-between was simply not visible. He stood on the edge of the group, enormous and still, amber eyes on Mav. Mav straightened. The silver at his scale edges went very flat. "Elder Voss, I was not aware you were on site." "I am aware of many things you are not," Voss said. "I am the last living elder of the bloodline that clutched these eggs. Under the Drithari Compact of Elder Authority, I hold protective claim over any surviving hatchling of that clutch." The compact was dissolved when the council voted to abandon. The compact was never formally dissolved. It was ignored. There is a difference. Voss moved forward, slow and deliberate. "I am invoking elder claim. The hatchling will be relocated to a safe environment under the guardianship of the bond it has formed. I do not object to that bond. Under compact law, my non-objection is sufficient." Mav's secondary eyelids closed completely for one long second. "The bond partner is a human." "I am aware. There is no precedent. There is no rule against it either." Voss stopped. "You are a counselor, Mav. You know the law better than you are pretending to. Find the clause that forbids it." The silence that followed was the kind that meant someone was losing an argument they had been certain they would win. Mav looked at Rin one more time. The hatchling had moved during all of this back to Dara's side. It was standing against her leg the way it always stood when there were too many unfamiliar sounds not hiding, just anchoring. "I will not obstruct the relocation," Mav said at last. "My objections will be filed formally with the consortium panel." "File what you need to file," Dara said. She crouched next to Rin and spoke to it quietly, explaining in a low voice that they were going to move, that there would be new sounds, new smells, but she would be there the whole time. Rin listened with its head tilted, then pressed its nose once to her cheek. She picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, growing. She walked toward the ship with it folded against her chest, and Rin made no sound at all, only that low, steady hum that she had learned meant it was not afraid. The storm did not wait 40 hours. It arrived in 19, which was the kind of thing Dravsal did, as though the planet had a specific distaste for plans. The pressure front hit the eastern shelf faster than the model predicted, and by the time the warning tone sounded aboard the Callow Reach, the sky outside had already turned the color of a bruise and the wind was moving hard enough to lean against. Dara, Rin, and Voss were outside. They had been doing the morning navigation exercise, Dara moving in slow circles at increasing distances from the ruin while Rin tracked her by sound, learning to separate her footsteps from the ambient noise of the plane. It was going well. Rin had found her from 12 meters, which was a new record, and then the pressure dropped and the exercise ended. The terrain between them and the Callow Reach was a low ridge of volcanic rock, stable in calm weather. In the first hard wind gust, a section of it sheared along a fracture line and dropped 2 meters, taking a 15-meter span of path with it. Dara heard the crack and felt it through her boots and turned to see a wall of broken stone where the path had been. Her comm lit up immediately. Soren's voice. "Are you clear? The ridge section on your side just..." "I know we are cut off." A silence on the comm. "How far is the drop?" 15 meters wide, looks like 2 meters down. I cannot cross it with Rin." Another silence. "The storm is going to be here in under an hour. I cannot get a shuttle to you in that terrain in this wind." Voss was already moving. He crossed to the edge of the drop, looked down without expression, and then turned and looked at the cliff face behind them. The volcanic cliff had been a boundary to the ruin's east side for as long as the ruin had existed, sheer, dark, covered in the kind of smooth stone that meant water ran down it regularly. "There is a secondary shelter," he said. Dara looked at him. "Where?" "Into the cliff. The Drithari who built the ruin did not build only the ruin." He turned his amber eyes toward her. "They built for the storm season. There are emergency chambers cut into the base of every cliff within a half-kilometer of a nesting site. I know where one is. I have sheltered there before." "Can we reach it before the storm?" "If we move now." Dara picked up Rin. The hatchling had gone very still in her arms, the full, total stillness that she had seen only once before, that first night in the ruin. Not fear, listening. Its head was moving in tiny arcs, processing the shift in air pressure, the change in wind direction, the way the sound of the plane had changed as the storm approached. It was reading the world in a way she could not. She told Soren over the comm where they were going, gave him Voss's directions to the cliff shelter entrance, and followed the old Drithari across the broken ground. Moving with Voss was its own education. He did not rush, but he was never slow. He moved around obstacles before Dara had registered they were there, a section of ground that looked stable but flexed slightly under his first step and was immediately abandoned. A low area between 2 rock formations where the air smelled wrong, and he curved around it without explanation. She copied each adjustment. The first band of rain hit when they were 200 meters from the cliff. It was horizontal and cold and loud, and it hit so suddenly that Dara flinched. Rin did not flinch. Rin pressed its nose into the rain and inhaled. Then it shifted in her arms, not struggling, redirecting, its head pushed firmly toward her left. She looked left. The cliff base was closer on that angle, and there was a natural overhang creating a channel that would block the worst of the wind. She turned left without second-guessing it. Voss, 2 steps ahead, also turned left. He glanced back at the hatchling, then at Dara, and said nothing. The shelter entrance was almost invisible, a low, narrow gap in the cliff base, framed by 2 flat stones that had been placed there deliberately, long ago, to mark it. Inside, the chamber was dry, completely dry. The Drithari who built it had understood the rock's water table and carved the chamber just above it. The walls were smooth. The floor was flat. There was no light, but there was space enough for all 3 of them. Dara set Rin down. It moved to the wall, pressed its nose along the base, and then settled in the corner with the calm of something that had decided this place was acceptable, as if it had already run the numbers. The storm hit fully minutes later. The sound outside became enormous, a continuous roar, layered and shifting. Inside the chamber it became distant, manageable. The stone absorbed most of it. Voss sat near the entrance, watching the rain. Dara sat with Rin. After a while, Voss said, without turning, "It led you to the overhang." "Yes." It could feel the pressure differential between the open ground and the sheltered channel. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I told you in the beginning that there were things it would never learn, things a blind hatchling could not survive without." He paused. "I was measuring by what I expected it to need. I was not measuring what it actually had." Dara looked at Rin. It had tucked its head under its wing in the way it did when it had decided a situation was resolved. Apparently the storm was filed under, handled. "You stayed for 60 years, she said. "You watched the ruin, you kept the entrance open." "I stayed because someone should," Voss said, the same words he had used the first day. "That is the same reason I walked into the ruin." Another long silence. Outside, Dravsal threw everything it had at the cliff, and the cliff did not move. The chamber held. Then Soren's voice came through the calm, clearer now that the storm had passed its first peak. "I have your location. Storm should break in 3 hours. Are you safe?" Dara looked at Rin, tucked and calm. At Voss, watching the rain with 60 years of patience in his eyes. "We are fine," she said, "all 3 of us." She heard Soren exhale. She heard him smile. She did not hear him say anything else, because some things did not need to be said out loud to be heard clearly. 3 weeks after the storm, Dara sat in a room with no windows and answered questions for 4 hours. The consortium panel convened remotely, which meant 9 faces on a wide screen and 1 moderator reading procedural language in a voice designed to make everything sound both important and impossible. The panel was from 6 different species. Most of them had never been to Dravsal. All of them had read the incident report 3 times, which Dara could tell because they kept asking about things that were in the report rather than things they actually wanted to understand. She answered each question the same way, clearly, with data, with the field notes she had kept every day, with Voss's testimony submitted in writing because he had declined to appear on a screen which he described as a flat and dishonest representation of space. Mav was on the panel. He had filed his formal objections as promised. He had also, without telling anyone he was going to do it, submitted a supplementary observation report. Dara had not known about it until the moderator referenced it mid-session. She read the first line on her screen. Hatchling behavioral development exceeds all documented benchmarks for bonded Drithari young of comparable age. She looked at Mav's face on the screen. He met her eyes and his scale edges did something she had not seen before, a slow, controlled shift to a soft bronze. She did not know what it meant in Vreth body language. She suspected it was something close to, "I did not change my position. I updated it. There is a difference." The panel debated for another hour after her testimony ended. She waited in the hall outside, drinking water and watching the cleaning unit make slow loops around the floor. Soren stood against the wall with his arms folded, not saying anything, which was the most supportive thing he knew how to do. The decision came through on her wrist screen before anyone formally announced it. Guardian Bond, recognized. First interspecies Drithari Guardian Bond in consortium recorded history. No existing statute prohibits the arrangement. Panel recommends review of Ecological Preservation Act subsection 9 to address gaps in interspecies care protocols. She read it twice. Then she sent Voss a message. 3 words they said yes. His reply came 4 minutes later. 1 word, obviously. She laughed in the empty hallway, and Soren looked at her with the expression of a man who had been waiting for that sound for 3 weeks. Rin had been aboard the Callow Reach for those 3 weeks. It had, in that time, mapped the entire ship. This was not a metaphor. It had genuinely navigated every corridor, every access bay, every room that crew members left open, using the echo of its own quiet sounds, small clicks and low tones that it produced constantly, barely audible, that bounced off surfaces and came back with information. The crew had started calling it singing, which was not accurate, but was not entirely wrong either. Rin was reading the ship the same way it had read the ruin and the cliff and the plain. Building a map that had nothing to do with eyes. The crew had also, without being asked or instructed, begun announcing themselves when they entered a room. A soft knock on an open doorframe. Their names said out loud before they moved further in. It had started with the 2 crew members who worked night shift and spent the most time in the corridors when Rin was also moving around. Then the others picked it up, one by one, the way small considerate habits spread when people are paying attention to each other. Nobody told them to do it, it just seemed right. Dara returned to the ship the evening after the panel. She came up the ramp and into the main corridor and said, out of habit, "I am back," not loudly, just into the air of the ship. Rin appeared from the side corridor within 10 seconds, not running, walking in that deliberate, measured way it had, its pale scales catching the corridor light. It stopped in front of her, head tilted, and made the low questioning sound. She answered it the same way she always did, with her breath, slow and steady. Rin pressed its head against her hand, held it there for a moment, and then turned and walked back the way it had come, pausing once at the corner as though checking she was following. She followed. It led her to the observation bay at the rear of the ship, which had a wide curved viewport looking out at the stars, and a floor that was warm from the heating coils below the plating. Rin had apparently decided this was its preferred room because it had left a particular smell there, a faint mineral warmth, like sun-heated stone, that Dara had learned to associate with contentment. It stretched out on the floor and settled. Its scales caught the starlight it could not see and spread it across the wall in slow patterns as it breathed. Dara sat down beside it. She pulled out the small notebook from her jacket pocket, the same one she had carried on Dravsal, now dense with Voss's lessons and her own observations, and opened it to a blank page. She began to read aloud from the beginning, which she did every evening now, her voice low and even, the way it had been from the very first night in the ruin. Rin's tail moved, slow, like a tide going somewhere without hurry. Soren found her there an hour later and stood in the doorway for a while, watching. He did not interrupt. Some things he had learned over the last weeks were not for interrupting. They were only for witnessing. The universe had a great deal of noise in it. Politics and panels and enforcement officers and procedural language read in flat voices. And sometimes the most important thing happening in it was just a human reading to a blind dragon in the dark, both of them alive, both of them exactly where they had chosen to be. He went quietly back to the engine room. The stars moved outside the viewport the way they always moved, slowly, enormously, without any concern for the small things happening in the warm room just inside the glass. But that was fine. The small things did not need the stars to notice them. They were already seen.